Okay, I want to talk to you a bit about leading a church through change, and of course, this is going to impact pretty much anything you do, because when you go into a church, the one thing that will be true is that you'll see things that need to change, and you're going to have to sort of prioritize these things about what needs to change. Now, there are two ways of thinking. One is when you go into a church, you go in with, sort of everybody's on your side. They just called you, everybody's feeling good, and so you ought to go ahead and change some significant things right then, immediately, because you're riding a crest of goodwill. You've got momentum going in, so you ought to change it. The other way of thinking is, hey, don't knock down a fence until you know why somebody built it, and you need to just be there for a year. For a year, don't do anything but preach and visit and love people and win folks to Jesus. Don't change anything, and sort of get the lay of the land. Now, both of these things have their reasons, and I will tell you, I think that they can both be true, but usually not in the same situation. So I'm telling you, I think you need to have both of these possibilities in your mind when you go into a church, and therefore you make decisions about whether or not you're going to lead them through change immediately, or whether you're going to bide your time and wait and get some credibility with them. And there are things that factor into this. First of all is the history of the church. And I can't say this enough. If that church has had a cycle of pastors, every 2 to 3 years, you're really not going to convince them to change. If they've just had sort of a bad experience, they're probably not going to give you the kind of clout you need to change things significantly at first. So you've got to take into consideration what's going on in the church, the history that has nothing to do with you. So this is the kind of information you've got to get from that committee, and think through very carefully and ask yourself, are they able to change? Now, every church has what I call a change quotient. That is, how much change can they handle at any one time? This is balanced by, remember what I think I've told you before, basically how many chips you've got in the bag. To use a terrible comparison, pastoring is a lot like playing poker. And not the poker so much, but the fact that you've got so many chips, and everything you do is going to cost you chips. And the bigger the change, the more significant the change, the more chips it's going to cost you. You've only got so many chips in the bag. Now, typically when you go into a church, you do have a few extra chips just for being new. But every time you change something, it's costing you chips. The bigger the change, the more chips it costs you. And the best leaders always know how many chips they've got in the bag. They have a real sense of how many chips are left in the bag. Bad leaders think that they have an unlimited source of chips, and that there's always more chips in the bag, and they get themselves in a deficit situation. So you need an appreciation of how many chips you've got. And this is going to be affected by your predecessor at that church, by the goodwill of the church, the spiritual health of the church. And do they idolize the former pastor, or do they just, he's beloved, but they understand, it's time for a change, and they're okay with that? Or are they mourning him, or are they glad he's gone? Do they have a horrible experience in his exit? Did something bad happen there? All that affects how many chips you've got in the bag going in. So frankly, if you're going into a church where they've had a series of pastors in short, rapid succession, you need to assume you're going in with fewer chips. You can't change things too much immediately, because their attitude is, I was here when you came. I'll be here when you go. I don't really need to listen to you. We're the ones that are going to be left holding the bag. So they're not going to be too excited about your changes because they see you already as somebody who's going to be gone. And therefore, they're just not going to give you that kind of chips to make change. But now, the question is, how do you get more chips in the bag? And frankly, you get more chips, you earn chips by doing the basic stuff and doing it well and doing it cheerfully. In other words, preach good sermons, visit people in the hospitals, love on people, invite people into your home, have good communication where you keep them apprised of things, and just look like you're enjoying yourself. Build relationships with people. All that gets you more chips in the bag. And, they say, I like this guy, I trust him. They see your walk with the Lord. They see your faithfulness. And they may not always agree with you, with your decisions, but they trust your heart. And that's really where you have to get people. And if you're going to lead a church through change, that's what you have to emphasize, is you got to let them know, hey, I know you may not always agree with my decisions or what I want to do, but I just ask you to trust my heart that with everything in me, I want to honor the Lord. I want to bless you. I want to serve you. And so if they really believe that, they'll go, I don't like what he's doing, but I trust him. And frankly, that's what's going to give you the credibility to lead them through change. It's if they trust your heart. Change is very, very difficult. The change can be as simple as changing, the order of the service. We take up the offering before the sermon, and you decide you want to move it till after. Let's say you say, well, I think it's good for us to have time. If people respond during the invitation, we ought to be able to take them out and talk to them, have a little time so we don't rush anybody through it. So let's move the offering to down after the invitation. Gives us more time, and plus, I think as a sort of a final act of worship, we've sung together, we've heard the word preached. Now before we leave, we give, we respond. So we're going to take up the offering then, and say you've got a rationale for doing that. I will tell you, there'll be some people that'll be a major deal to. It sounds like such a small thing, but again, it's just changing the way they've always done it. That costs you chips, and if you've got a year of preaching well, visiting them, loving on them, having them in your home, you're in their home, then the people that get all bent out of shape over even a minor change like that, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to stick with him through this. This isn't a big deal. Because they like you, because they've seen your walk with the Lord, because they've gained some trust for you during that year. So you have to have a sense of both. But if you go into a place where you sort of know the situation. I'll tell you, when I went to Ashland Avenue, again, I was 30 years old, and I had been on staff for 7 years, gone for 3. I had enough knowledge of the church. I knew what needed to change immediately. And so, and the problem there was, my predecessor had been there for 23 years. And they were, he was 73 years old. They were ready for him to leave. They loved him, but they were ready for him to go, and they were ready for some significant changes. Had I waited a year, it would have cost me chips to, if I'd had that philosophy and said, well, don't change anything for a year. And they wanted change. They needed change. They didn't want the same old, same old. They'd had that for 23 years. And you have to discern. So which way going into the church should you go? But either way, you've always got to strive to earn and keep their trust and have credibility with them. Now, the thing that guys, I think, probably have the biggest issue with, the thing that we say, well, it shouldn't be a big deal, but it is changing worship styles. And I'll tell you, it is important. I wish I could tell you it really doesn't matter what worship style you have, but I think that's not true. It does matter. And I just don't think you're going to grow a church singing songs and in a style that is either not really consistent with the culture around you, or else the style doesn't sort of speak to the generation you're trying to reach. I love old hymns. I just can confess to you, I don't even know, you guys probably don't even know what the Bible Broadcasting Network is, BBN, but it's as old school as it gets. I can remember as a kid driving, hours in the car with my dad late at night. We'd drive from West Kentucky up to Lexington, and he'd turn on the dial to some old gospel station, and we'd listen to preaching and singing. It wasn't Southern gospel. My dad liked sort of hymns, sort of in the revivalistic genre, studio arrangements of that, and that's what Bible broadcasting basically is. There's a BBN repeater in Frankfort. My radio stays on it. I love it. I get in and hear, old hymns, His Eyes on a Sparrow. I love it. It takes me back to my childhood, those memories with my dad. But I would be ridiculous and totally, first of all, self-centered, and secondly, unconcerned about reaching people if that's what I had my church sing. And I'm just not going to do that. There are people in my church who love Southern gospel, and they'd love it if that's what we sang, Southern gospel. And there's a pretty good-sized church in my town that is what they do. But frankly, I think if you're going to reach, and I would argue, and I would also tell you that church is filled with gray hairs. I think you do have to be aware of worship styles, and you need to lead a church to sing music that is going to grab a visitor and say, this place is alive. Now, several things here you need to keep in mind if you're talking about changing worship styles. Number one, the pastor is the de facto worship leader. I just can't emphasize this enough. You are the worship leader. It doesn't matter that you're not up there on the platform leading it, beating out 4/4 time. Somebody else might be doing that, but I'm going to tell you, if you're the pastor, you set the tone for the worship in that service, whether you like it or not. This is why I think it is a travesty for a pastor to come in and sit on the front row, and instead of participating in the worship, he's got his Bible open and he's reading or looking at his notes and sort of going over what he's about to say. I just think that's horrendous. Let me say to you, first of all, if you don't have it by the time that service starts, you ain't going to get it in those 15 minutes. So don't even try. Make sure you're prepared well enough that you don't need to be looking at notes and fumbling with your Bible and marking stuff during the worship time. Get that done before you come into the service. And when you come in, you need to worship. You need to worship freely. You need to model what you want your people to do. So if you're in a church where people are sort of lifeless and they sing these songs just out of routine and rote, you got to make sure that you sing with vibrancy, that you move. And, if you want them to be free to lift their hands, you got to lift your hands. You need to be free in worship, because whatever you are is sort of going to give them permission. I'm not going to say that they'll necessarily do it. What I'm saying is they won't feel permission to do it if you don't do it. Whatever it is you don't do, they won't feel permission to do. So if you go in there and you're just trying to match what they do, then first of all, I would say you're not leading. And secondly, I'd say they'll never change. All right, so you need to just keep that in mind. And I would urge you to be free in your expression of worship, though you might interpret what I'm about to say cynically. I don't mean it that way. You've got to be constantly aware that they're watching you. They are watching you. They're watching the way you worship. They're watching you. But at the same time, you have to remember that they aren't your audience. I know there's a tension there. God is your audience. And so you need to worship him freely. But you can't block out the reality that they're watching you and that they will get permission to worship as you do. And so I would encourage you, you need to worship, be involved in the worship. Let them see passion in you. Let them see joy on your face. I think it's really important that you smile, that you emote in every way, that you be free to worship, because you are the de facto leader. And I tell you, if you go into a church where the pastor isn't free, they won't be free there. You won't feel it. Like if you feel freedom, typically to lift your hands in praise, you go into church where you see the pastor's not doing it, you don't know to do it. What about clapping? Like at Buck Run, after a song, we clap. Not just somebody singing a solo or something, a congregational song. I mean, that's part of our celebration. You go to a church where they don't do that, and you're sort of looking around. Do we have permission to do this or not? I mean, sometimes here in chapel, I sense that. It's like, hey, can we clap after a song or not? We're not sure because Dr. Moeller doesn't do it. Well, he's the de facto worship leader, and people are sensitive to how he feels about it. Now, Moeller doesn't like it, but he doesn't mind anybody doing it. That's where Dr. Moeller is. He's made his peace with it with other people, but he'll be very honest and say he doesn't like it. But he gets it. That is as much an expression of hearty approval as an amen. That's just the way I call it, saying amen with your hands. And when I went to Ashland Avenue and I sort of freed them up, I mean, the worship was so rigid and I would call it cold when I went there. I told them, hey, clapping is just saying amen with your hands. I said, and I can show you several verses in the Bible talking about clapping your hands. And I said, as far as what's in your heart, first of all, I had some people say, well, that's just for doing it for the praise of man. I said, number one, you can't judge anybody else's heart. You can't make that pronouncement. That's not yours to make. I said, but, Ashland Avenue is 1 mile, literally 1 mile from Rupp Arena in Lexington, which is the Holy of Holies of college basketball. And I would tell them, isn't there something strange that you'll go down there and you'll get so excited about a guy on the floor putting a round ball through a round hoop and swishing a net, and man, you'll cheer and you'll get excited about that. But the things of the Lord, somehow you're saying that shouldn't excite you. Well, let's just read the Old Testament. Just read the way they worship. Go to Israel today and go to the Western Wall and see the way. Why do they do this whole thing of bending and constantly moving when they pray? Because they say that the Bible commands them to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And they say that's part of their expression of their strength. And so that's why they move like that. Well, if the Jews get that, if basketball fans get that, how much more should we get it? So I just walked them through that. And I said, we're not forcing anybody to do anything. You're not comfortable doing it, don't do it. What we're saying is, you're free to. And I just sort of led them through that, talked them through that, and I was free in my worship. Here's the key. You never are really forcing anybody to do anything that they aren't comfortable doing, they don't want to do it. It's all about freedom in worship. And you can show them that in the Word. And I talked to them about lifting hands. Again, I can show you 9 verses in the Bible, 9 passages that talk about lifting hands. And it was funny, I pastored a church that they were very, very tight on women keeping silent in the church. I showed them in the same passage. I will that men pray everywhere, lifting holy hands in prayer. I said, why are you not as insistent on literally taking that as you are on literally taking what it says about women not teaching men? I said, both of these things are in the same passage. We've got to take them all. And I just always pointed them to the Word. I acted free. I freed up others too. But I also will tell you that changes like this have to sort of be incremental. You don't just come in one day and, hey, on this Sunday, we're starting. We're going to start lifting our hands or anything like that. You know, it's you teaching them, you walking them through this a little bit at a time. And as far as changing the worship style or your repertoire, let me give you a few keys that will really help you. This will help you avoid the worship wars. I've led 3 churches through a change in worship style. Probably Buck Run less so than the other 2, but because Buck Run was already pretty much there. But we didn't have any church splits, we didn't have any church fights, because I observed a few basic rules. Number 1, never ever make them feel like you're taking something away from them. Only that you're adding to them. Okay? The pastor who says, hey, we're going to quit singing these hymns and we're going to start singing praise choruses is an idiot. I have no better word for it. See, if you tell them, no, I'm taking this away from you. We're not going to do this anymore. Well, man, I love those old hymns. I've been singing those hymns my life. Those hymns mean something to me. You're taking that away from me, you've got a fight on your hands. People are going to fight you over you taking away from them. But if you value those and you talk about the great tradition of these hymns and how they minister to our souls, and then say, the good news is the Lord's raised up people today who are writing great stuff too. And we're blessed to have several different ways to praise the Lord. And in addition to these great songs we sing, we want to learn some new stuff. There's a lot of good stuff being written these days. And, so you're adding to. Well, people don't get mad so much as you adding to, as long as you're not taking away. All right, so number 1, you never ever make them feel like you're taking away, you're only adding to. Secondly, you never ask them to sing anything that they've not heard before. People are terribly frustrated, especially older people, when they are forced into unfamiliar territory. And suddenly you say, okay, we're going to learn a new song today. They don't want to learn a new song. They didn't come to church to learn a new song. They don't want to learn a new song. And man, they just immediately get resistant, because older people are often afraid that they can't learn something. And when you tell them, oh, you're going to have to learn something, I don't like that. So instead of asking them to learn something, what you do is you need to have a soloist or some small group sing that song. Sing it one Sunday. 2 weeks later, have them sing it again. This time, maybe put the words of the chorus up on the screen, or maybe while they're singing it sort of as a special number, they ask people to sing the chorus with them, or they just teach the chorus. And again, nobody feels like they're have anything forced on them, because that's slot sort of for a soloist or something. It's not the song leader saying, hey, we're going to learn a new song. And, let them hear it about 3 times. And then, maybe the next time you have those words in the bulletin or on the screen, whatever technology you have available, and they're asked to sing it with them. Now, this really takes away that fear. They're not being just thrown out there, pushed out there against their will. Hey, learn this new song. They've heard it. They like it. They were asked to sing a part of it. They were shown the words now, and they're asked to sing along, but they don't feel the responsibility, of carrying the thing. You've got this small group or this soloist who's carrying it. And then they like it. Now you can add it as an element in your congregational worship. They've heard it 2 or 3 times. They've sung it one time with the guy or with the group. Now, a few weeks later, you put it in your order of service. Hey, yeah, that's that song we heard that old Billy Bob sang. We can sing that. See, you didn't force anything on them that they've not heard. It was not an unfamiliar thing the first time they heard it. The third rule is when that is done, it has to be done with excellence. Anytime you introduce a new element, you cannot do it poorly, or that just gives them that much more ammunition to shoot it down. It has to be done well. So, I've been doing this my whole life. I can remember when I was in my late teens, and I began sort of leading music and leading choirs and stuff while I was still in high school. And then, my first job was as a choir director. That was sort of my first ministry. We were still having the debate back in the late 70s about whether or not to use soundtracks. Now, for a minister of music in a church with poor musicians, these were a godsend. You could do it. But I tell you, nobody had good sound equipment back then. You had an amp, like this little amp box, and about 4 or 5 microphones plugged into the thing. And so you had to get a tape deck and plug it in, and somebody had to operate the tape deck. And I saw it done badly. Well, and I heard preachers preach against soundtracks. Because I had one preacher, a friend of mine, who I remember him saying, well, that would be like if I made a soundtrack for while I preach, the soundtrack would go, amen, preach it, brother, that's right. He said, well, you wouldn't like that. Well, it's not the same thing at all, but to him it was. We had that big debate, and I saw people singing and the tape drag a little bit. Back then it was mechanized tape, and so the heads would get dirty and it'd drag a little bit, and you'd hear the pitch go down, or it would just, for whatever reason, I can't tell you how many services I've been in where it just quit working altogether, and the tape would stop in the middle of their song, and so they're stuck. And there's this awkward moment. Do I keep singing a cappella, or do I hope that the guy's going to fix it? And then if the lady keeps singing a cappella, but then the guy gets it fixed, and so he just starts where it ended or wherever he wants it to, and now she's got to figure out where the song is, and it made people hate them. And people would go, I'm against soundtracks. Well, they weren't against soundtracks. They were against it being done poorly. Now, you can take that and you can apply it to anything, having a live band in the service. If you suddenly one day you bring a band in there and you got a live drum set 2 feet from the front row where your senior deacon sits, and it's too loud, and oh man, they're going to hate that. You've got to do it sensitively. You got to do it smart. You've got to do it where it doesn't drive them away. It's got to be done with excellence. So if you have someone sing a new song, they need to do a killer job of it. I mean, they just really need to do it well. And the more people like it, the more inclined they're going to be to sing it. So you don't just introduce a new element that they've never heard. You let them hear it first. You make sure it's done with excellence, all right? The fourth thing is that you don't ever ask them to learn like more than one new thing in any service. Only introduce one new thing. Don't overdo it. You think, well, that went well. Let's shove another one down their throats. If you overdo it, again, what you're doing, you're bumping the needle up near the top of that change quotient. And everybody's got it. Older people have much less change quotient than most. And you just can't take getting the old people against you. They're the ones that have been around the longest. They're the ones that tend to have invested the most in the church. And they have less, they have more resistance to change, but they have less resistance to voicing their opinion. They just don't give a rip. They don't care if it hurts you or not. They don't care what anybody thinks about them. They're past that stage. They'll say anything. So you get them, too many of them riled up against you, this tsunami begins to build. You don't want that. So one new element at a time. That's what they can handle. You do that, and then you don't introduce a new element again for maybe a month, and then you do the same kind of procedure where They hear it first. They're asked to sing a little bit of it at first. It's done well. And you know, over the course of time, they're learning new stuff. Nothing's been taken away from them, at least not perceptibly and not in any way that they resent. But they like this new stuff. It does worship the Lord. And what you do, along with that, the next thing is that you've got to emphasize theological content instead of musical style. This is what you want to go for. You really want to discipline your people to sort of think theologically. All right, how do I do this? Or what does this song mean? And it's not about, hey, we don't like old hymns anymore, or we're not going to do Southern gospel anymore. It's not about that. Instead, it's about it's about the content of the song, and that's the basis on which we evaluate it. Is there great old stuff? Yes, there's great old stuff. Is there bad old stuff? There's real bad old stuff. Is there bad new stuff? There's bad new stuff. Well, I don't want to sing anything just because it's new. I want to sing anything just because it's popular. Man, throughout my 30-plus years of ministry, I can't tell you, every time I hear some popular song that mentions God, I cringe because I know it's coming. I'm going to be in some church service somewhere, and they're going to sing that song because it's popular. They play it on the radio or whatever, and it mentions God, and so they think, oh, then that's a good song. Jesus at the wheel, or God is watching us from a distance. I've heard it all. I've been in services where that stuff gets sung, and you just go, oh, my goodness. Well, I want my people to evaluate something based on its content. So, once you do that, music style becomes secondary. So, we're going to hang on to the rich tradition of old hymns. Now, the other thing we'll do, though, is we'll take old stuff and put it in a new setting. So, this is what I loved about, like Indelible Grace, some of their music, Arise My Soul, Arise, Shake Off Your Guilty Fears. Well, there's the old version of that, which is slow and plodding, and then there's the Indelible Grace version, which I really like, and man, you put a little harmonica in that, it's awesome. What I think you'll find is that a lot of times you've got people in your church with talents, but they've never really been encouraged to use them. And when you sort of set a direction like that, these people will surface. In addition to that, hopefully you'll lead people to Christ who have these talents. And once you begin going that direction and sort of what we can do, what we can sing, and start evaluating things theologically, God will bring people to the surface. Now, you've heard me say several times, you always reproduce what you honor. That's just a key. So I want to warn you, if you honor talent above content, above worship, you'll get talent, but it will cost you in the long run. And you don't want to do that. I've been in churches where talent drives everything. At Buck Run, for instance, I'll give you we do it quite a bit differently than most places do. We don't have the same praise team every week. We have different people. We have rotating members of the praise team. We don't have the same praise band every week. Somebody might be up there one week and not the next. And we do this because we don't want people to take ownership of a position. We don't pay our musicians. When I went there, we paid the pianist and the organist. And it took several years, but you know what? And I did it just by emphasizing rendering our service to the Lord and our musicians, the ones that, because we paid the pianist and the organist. We had all these other musicians that didn't get paid. And it was the pianist and the organist at the time who volunteered, hey, we don't think it's right for us to get paid. And they that's where I was wanting it to go anyway. and they sort of came to their own conclusion. And now, of course, we don't use an organ much anymore anyway. But when you honor worship above talent, when you honor theology above talent, then that's what you reproduce. Talent becomes secondary. We honor character above talent. We've had some incredible musicians that have come to Buck Run, and then had moral failure in their lives, unrepentant. No, we don't want, you can't serve. Also, before I came to Buck Run, they would just hire people, whether they were saved, lost, Baptist, Jewish, didn't matter. They would just come in, there'd be an orchestra of people whom I had never seen before, and they were simply hired for the occasion. Now, I'm not going to say that that's wrong. I'm going to say I'm not comfortable with it, and I am definitely going to say I don't think that should be the norm. Some special occasion or something you need an orchestra for, maybe. I still don't like it. I'm not going to tell you it's sin. I don't like that kind of professionalism. I want it to be service from the heart. I want to honor really character above talent. And I'd rather have a so-so orchestra of people who love Jesus and serve faithfully in a lot of other areas than a bunch of prima donnas who are great musicians whom we pay. So that's just my value. And it's worked well for us. We're blessed that we've got both. We've got incredible musicians, but we've got it in the right order. They know that it's not their musicianship that enables them to serve. So you really need to, you need to honor character above talent, worship, content above talent, make talent secondary. It's great to have talent, and I'll tell you, if you're in a church where you really don't have any, it's hard. I know that. And that's when maybe you pull out the soundtracks and stuff like that. There are options. But still, I don't think you ever sacrifice character just for the sake of having great musicians. I don't think you should sacrifice character. So when you do things that way, man, people accept the change. So you put things, old songs in a new setting, fresh touch. You combine an old song with a new chorus. There are a lot of things like that. You can get arrangements that take an old hymn and give it a fresh arrangement, and then put a sort of a contemporary bridge in there between verses. And so what does this do? It weans your older people off of the same old way of doing it. And if they say, well, we never sing any old hymns, you go, well, of course we do. Remember, just last Sunday we sang that. Jesus paid it all. Remember that? And, oh, yeah, that's right. Well, you just freshen it up a bit, because you've got to be able to reach, frankly, new people, younger people. And when they come in, younger families come in, if it's just the same old hymn sung with drudgery, I don't care how great your preaching is. The truth is, you never get to them. You don't even get a crack at them. People will decide within the first 10 minutes of their experience in that church whether or not they will ever come back. 10 minutes. So the way they're greeted in the parking lot or when they come into the building, how easily they find a place, whether or not people greet them and offer them a place to sit, all that. And then when the worship begins, if the worship is a drudgery, and especially they've had other bad experiences, it makes them a little bit uncomfortable. And typically, new people come late. They're going to come about 5 minutes late. And they do this so they won't have to talk to people. So the service starts at 10:30. They can get there at 10:35, so they can sort of come in unnoticed and sit wherever there's a spot. They don't have to address anybody. So that music is like the first thing they notice. And if it's just drudgery, you don't even get a crack at them if you're preaching. They've already said, ugh, this is rough. I had a couple visit Buck Run just this week. And at the end of the service, they talked to me and they said, wow, said, oh, this was wonderful. So we were hungry for this. And of course, the egocentric me, I assumed they were talking about the sermon. And he said, where we've been going to church, he said, the worship there is just awful. He said, now the preaching's good. He said, but man, we were just so thirsty for this kind of worship. So he wasn't even talking about my preaching at all. He was talking about our worship. And his characterization of where they went that was very unsatisfying to him was good preaching. He had found no fault in the pastor's preaching, but the worship stunk. And he said it was just drudgery. It was just hard for them to go to church. So that's pretty important. If people who love the Lord feel like, man, it's hard for me to go there because the worship's bad, it's important. And so when you go into a church, this is one of the things you've got to evaluate, but you've got to be smart about it. You can't just turn everything upside down and expect them to stay on board with you. You've got to lead them through that gently. And I'll tell you, if you pull that off well, the worship boards is probably the touchiest thing because and it's the thing that we do every week, right? Other things that you change aren't necessarily things that you do every week, but changing the worship style or the content, that's every week, and so it matters to everybody. If you pull that off well, again, you've gained some credibility, and then you look at deeper things. And there's always change that needs to occur in the church. In fact, ultimately, you'll get to a place where, if you're wise, you're always looking to tweak things anyway. I mean, change is just part of it because the world's changing so fast around us. But you've got to get to the place where you have credibility, and you're not changing just for the sake of change. The other thing I would tell you is you just always got to be transparent and honest. Sometimes you're going to need to try things that may not work. And you need to tell them that up front. Sort of set them up to change again by saying, hey, we're going to try this for the gospel's sake, for the sake of reaching people. We're going to try this. I don't know if it'll work or not. But we're going to give it our best shot, and we're going to do it long enough to give it an opportunity to work. And if it doesn't work, then we're going to try something else. I will tell you exactly the way this is. When I went to Buck Run, they had already, the year before I came, they had bought 100 acres and had invested $100,000 in a master plan for the development of that, for the plans for that. And when I got there, I looked at how many are in the church, what the budget of the church is, and I knew right away we cannot afford that master plan. We can't do that. I'm not going to sink us in that amount of debt. And so, we've already bought the property. I mean, the move is going to take place. Some people are wanting it to happen right then, but on a $1.2 million budget at the time, $1.2 million budget, I'm not going to put us in $10 million of debt. You can't afford debt that's almost 10 times your annual income. You can't do that. And I wasn't going to do that. So I had to think of other ways. All right, how can we got to grow in order to finance that move, we need to grow, but I'm not going to get in debt and then feel the pressure. Oh, we need more people to pay for the building. So it's more about debt than it is about reaching the lost. So we talked about it. How can we do it? How can we grow right here? And where we are at Buck Run, we're completely landlocked. We cannot add any more parking. You can always add another service or something, but we've got 2 services and 2 Sunday schools, and so we're all there on property at the same time, pretty much at the time. And so, the people coming on for one service, leaving for the other, there's about a 20-minute period there where there's not a space to be found. And you can't grow with no parking and no place to go. So I said, okay, how about if we start a satellite campus over near our new property? There's a Christian school over there, a mile from our new property. And we'll have service over there at 9 o'clock. And then over here at 10:45, I'll preach there. And then they have their Sunday school there. Then I'll drive over here. I'll preach. They'll have Sunday school at the home campus first, and then I'll get there and preach the second service. man, and I told him, I said, I don't know if this will work or not. Let's try it. You know, we know that this way we'll have adequate parking. So let's try it. And we did it, and there was an immediate boost. We picked up, you know, we were in that Christian school. That service took off. It had a lot more energy. Our younger, more energetic people that are willing to try stuff, that's where they went. And so, man, that first service, we kicked off with about 150 people. It was awesome, high energy. This was great. But we were in the cafeteria, and it was a nice room, low ceiling. You felt intimate. Within 6 months, we maxed that out, and we ran out of room. So, okay, now we've got a decision to make here, and the only thing left to us was to go into the gym. And I will tell you, the move into the gym killed it. It absolutely killed it. We never grew after that. I'm telling you, the feeling of a room matters, and I'd love to tell you it doesn't, but it does. Once we made the move into the gym, I don't know, it just changed the dynamic, and new families coming, they just don't like worshiping in a gym so much, you know, and we didn't lose anybody. We just didn't reach anybody new. It was stagnant. We did it for 2 more years. And in the gym, you had huge setup and takedown. You know, it was like putting up every chair, sound system, all that. And I had a crew that got there, you know, 7 o'clock in the morning to start this. The school wouldn't let us in on Saturdays. And so we did it 7 o'clock in the morning, it's up. Then another team has to take it down, you know, has to hang around. So they're not getting out till 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Well, everybody did it, and they did it willingly. When you do that for years, especially you're not seeing growth there. And then this thing started where people were like, oh, we miss all being together. Oh, we miss being together. I protested. I said, what are you talking about? Even when we were all on the same site, we still had 2 services. And people in the first service were never with people in the second service, and vice versa. So whether we're, you know, on 2 sides of Frankfurt having these 2 services or on the same property, it really is irrelevant because you're not together anyway. It just didn't matter. There was something emotional about it, and especially the older people. Well, you know, and they were willing. They weren't, no one was like, we will not do this. Nobody dug in. It was just like, oh, we just miss all being together. Well, we never were all together. What are you talking? We never were all together. And yet that just persisted, and since we weren't growing anyway, I just said, after 3 years of doing it, we're wearing our people out. It's not done what we wanted to do. Let's bring it back. And we'd spent a lot of money for the church in the box thing, you know, the sound system and all that, which we ended up giving to a church plant, so we were able to bless somebody else. But you know, the thing that I had going for me is we had been real honest up front and said, we don't know if this will work or not, but let's give it everything we got. And we really did that. We did that. And we didn't count on factors like the dynamics of the gym killing the growth. At the time, you know, we thought, well, we'll be happy if we just max out the cafeteria. But when that happened, we had to try it, and boy, we just never grew again. So, you know, I think what we did well in all that, I like the fact that we got them accustomed to trying stuff, even if it doesn't work out. And you've got to encourage that. But remember, you got to have chips in the bag. The whole time you're doing that, how do you get chips? Preach good sermons. You got to preach well, visit the sick, be in touch with people, write notes to folks. All that stuff keeps you with credibility, you know, so that when you ask for that change, they're on board with you. Leading a church through change is incredibly challenging, and you can't force them. And if you do, you'll just, even if you win the battle, you will lose the war. You've got to be gentle in the way you do it. You got to be smart. You got to think through all the objections and preclude them, all that. It's true. But the bottom line is you've got to do the basics well the whole time you're doing all the other stuff and trying to get them to change.